The largest empire that ever existed did not fall to any enemy army. No one invaded it, no one conquered it. It destroyed itself, generation after generation, every time a leader died, because the Mongols never answered a single question: who rules next? In just 60 years, that unanswered question turned history's most feared empire into 4 countries that ended up fighting each other. This is how the Mongol Empire killed itself. Around 1162, on the steppes of Mongolia, a boy named Temujin is born. His father, a minor chieftain, is poisoned by a rival tribe when the boy is barely 9. His clan abandons him, his mother, and his siblings, at the mercy of the Mongol winter, a death sentence for almost anyone. Temujin does not die. He survives hunting rodents and roots, briefly enslaved by an enemy tribe, escaping at night across frozen rivers. And as he survives, he learns the one lesson that will serve him the rest of his life. On the steppe, blood loyalty isn't enough. You have to build loyalty through merit. But unifying the Mongol tribes is not a clean rise. Before being crowned, Temujin has to face and defeat his own sworn blood brother, Jamuka, and Anda, a brother by oath, not by birth, in a tribal war that drags on for years. The final victory over Jamuka in 1206 is what finally lets him convene the Kurultai that crowns him. By 1206, almost 40 years after that winter of abandonment, that abandoned boy has unified all the Mongol tribes, something no one had ever achieved, under a single title: Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He didn't do it through kinship. He did it by destroying the tribal clan system and replacing it with something new: advancement through loyalty and ability, no matter which family you came from. And he doesn't rule with the sword alone. He issues the Yasa, a written legal code that applies equally to nobles and commoners, almost unheard of on the steppe, with rules on theft, desertion, and even the protection of envoys and diplomatic messengers. It's partly what makes it possible to sustain an empire of that size, not just military speed, but shared rules. It's a stroke of military and political genius, and it is, though no one knows it yet, the first crack in the empire he's about to build. Because a system that doesn't depend on blood to grant power also has no clear rule of blood to inherit it. With the tribes unified, Genghis Khan has something no enemy has faced before: a full army of horsemen, mounted archers trained since childhood. With a decentralized command system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 men that moves faster than any settled army of its time. And that speed is no accident. Genghis Khan and his successors build the Yam, a network of relay stations every 30 or 40 kilometers, across thousands of kilometers of steppe, with fresh horses and messengers ready day and night. A Yam rider can cover more than 300 kilometers in a single day. Information and orders travel from one end of the empire to the other, faster than at any other point in history up to then. The first great victim is the Jin dynasty in northern China in 1211. Then the Western Xia dynasty. City after city falls to a force that doesn't just conquer territory, it conquers information. The Mongols recruit Chinese siege engineers, Persian astronomers, administrators from every culture they subdue, and fold them into the machinery of the empire. The Mongols don't just conquer, they administer. They order population censuses in every subdued territory, from northern China to Russia, to systematically calculate taxes and military recruitment, decades before most European kingdoms did the same. But the moment that transforms the Mongols from a regional threat into a force that will remake the map of the world happens in 1218.
In a city called Otrar, in the Khwarezmian Empire, the most powerful Muslim empire in Central Asia. Genghis Khan sends a trade caravan of 450 merchants to Otrar. The local governor, convinced they are spies, orders them all massacred. Genghis Khan then sends a peace delegation to demand an explanation. The Khwarezmian Shah executes the lead envoy and shaves the heads of the other 2 as a humiliation. It's a mistake that costs an entire empire. Genghis Khan mobilizes somewhere between 90,000 and 200,000 horsemen, depending on the source, and in just 2 years wipes the Khwarezmian Empire off the map. Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench, entire cities, some of the largest in the Islamic world, reduced to rubble and pyramids of skulls as a warning. Genghis Khan dies in 1227, still on campaign against the Western Shah. But what he leaves behind isn't just an empire, it's a conquest machine. His sons and grandsons will keep running for decades. His third son, Ogedei Khan, doesn't just inherit the army, he founds a permanent capital, Karakorum, in the heart of Mongolia, something his father, always on campaign, never stopped to build. Karakorum becomes a genuine crossroads. Chinese merchants, European envoys, Buddhist and Muslim monks live side by side in the same city under the same imperial protection.
Decades later, a Franciscan friar sent by the King of France, William of Rubruck, reaches Karakorum and describes a court where Nestorian Christians, Buddhists, Muslims, and Mongol shamans all coexist under the same authority, with none of them forced to convert. His third son, Ogedei Khan, finishes crushing the Jin dynasty in 1234, and then orders something no leader had ever attempted: a simultaneous invasion of Eastern Europe. Generals Batu Khan and Subutai cross into Russia, sack Kiev in 1240, and in 1241 destroy two European armies within weeks, the Poles at Legnica, the Hungarians at Mohi. At Legnica, Duke Henry II, the Pious, leader of the Polish-German coalition, is killed. His head is displayed on a spear in front of the besieged city as a warning. Days later, at Mohi, the Hungarian army suffers one of the worst defeats in medieval Europe, tens of thousands of soldiers dead in a single day. The road to Vienna, to Rome, to Paris lies open. No European army is capable of stopping the Mongols. And yet, they never arrive. Because in December 1241, news arrives from Mongolia that is about to stop an entire army in the middle of its triumph, and that moment will reveal for the first time the flaw that was sooner or later going to destroy everything Genghis Khan built.
Under the unified empire, a Venetian merchant named Marco Polo will be able to travel, decades later, from the Mediterranean all the way to Kublai Khan's court in China, overland, almost without interruption, something unthinkable before or after this moment. That same network of protected roads is what sustains trade, information, and, without anyone knowing it yet, is also about to sustain something far more lethal. And to keep trade flowing without friction, the Mongols standardize the routes, cut the arbitrary tolls of local kingdoms, and guarantee armed protection for caravans. Pax Mongolica, historians later call it. The first time in history you could cross the whole of Asia under a single law. By 1250, the Mongol Empire is waging war, at the same time, on three separate fronts, against the Song dynasty in southern China, against the Abbasid Caliphate in the Middle East, and holding control of half of Eastern Europe. No previous empire had managed to coordinate a military force across such distant fronts simultaneously. In the final siege against the Song dynasty at Xiangyang, the Mongols used counterweight trebuchets designed by Persian engineers capable of launching projectiles over 100 kilos against walls that had held for years. The city falls in 1273. It's the engineering of the entire world put to work for a single army. By the time the Mongol expansion reaches its peak, under Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, around 1279, the empire covers about 24 million square kilometers. The Roman Empire, at its greatest extent, covered about 5 million. The Mongols built an empire almost 5 times larger than Rome in a sixth of the time it took Rome to reach its maximum size. The final conquest of the entire Song dynasty is only completed in 1279, 73 years after the Kurultai that crowned Genghis Khan, the last piece needed for the empire to reach its maximum size. The same year that marks, according to historians, the true ceiling of Mongol expansion. It is, to this day, the largest contiguous land empire that has ever existed, and in less than 60 years from this point on, it's going to stop existing as a single thing. Let's go back to December 1241. Ogadai Khan, the Great Khan, the son who inherited Genghis's empire, dies in Mongolia, and with that news, Batu Khan and Subutai do something no military historian would expect from an army at the gates of conquering Western Europe. They withdraw. No one defeated them. They left because, under Mongol law, the succession of the Great Khan requires a Kurultai, a council of every prince of Genghis Khan's blood from every branch of the family, scattered at that moment across half a continent, and every prince with a vote has to be present or represented by his army. Convening a Kurultai after Genghis Khan's death isn't gathering a handful of local nobles. It means making princes travel, on horseback, for months, from Persia, from Russia, from China, all the way to Mongolia and back. Every succession literally paralyzes half a continent for as long as that journey takes. And a Kurultai itself isn't a simple vote. It can last weeks, even months, of feasting, negotiation, and shifting alliances between factions. This is the flaw Genghis Khan never solved. He built the most meritocratic system of military advancement of his time and never built an equally clear rule of succession. Every time a great Khan dies, the entire empire has to stop. Entire armies, thousands of kilometers away, in the middle of victory, turn around. Ogedai's succession isn't clean. His widow, Toragain, rules as regent for almost 5 years, replacing generals and administrators loyal to Genghis Khan's original line with her own network of allies, sowing resentment among the other branches of the family that will explode years later. She manipulates the Kurultai in favor of her son, Guyuk. When Guyuk is finally elected Great Khan in 1246, he's already ill. He dies barely 2 years later in 1248, perhaps on his way to an armed confrontation with his own cousin, Batu Khan. Another Kudeltai, another paralysis. In 1251 comes the blow that turns the crack into a fracture. Unlike the Kudeltai that crowned Genghis Khan, the result of decades of alliances built one by one, this one is held surrounded by troops loyal to the Toluid branch, with rival princes summoned under threat more than by consensus. It's no longer a ceremony, it's a coup dressed up as a ceremony. Mongol Khan, of the Toluid branch, Genghis's youngest son, is elected Great Khan in a Kudeltai that directly excludes the descendants of two of Genghis's four sons, those of Ogadei and those of Chagatai. Mongol consolidates power by purging dozens of rival princes and generals. Historians estimate that dozens of princes, generals, and officials from the rival branches are executed or exiled in the purge that follows, the largest political purge Genghis Khan's dynasty ever suffered, carried out by its own blood. It's the first time the family that built the largest empire in the world openly turns against itself. Mongol keeps expanding the empire. His brother Hulagu Khan sacks Baghdad in 1258 and ends 500 years of the Abbasid Caliphate. Chroniclers of the era estimate that Baghdad's population, then one of the largest and most literate cities in the world, was reduced by hundreds of thousands of people in just a few days of siege and sack. Figures modern historians debate, but which at the time marked the symbolic end of the Islamic Golden Age. But in 1259, Mongol dies on campaign in southern China, and this time there's no orderly retreat and no peaceful Kudeltai. Two brothers, Kublai and Arik Bulke, declare themselves Great Khan at the same time, each at his own Kudeltai, each backed by his own army. It's open civil war inside the family that rules half the known world. Kublai doesn't win the civil war with battles alone. He cuts the grain and supply routes to Karakorum, the capital his own grandfather founded, leaving his brother Arik Bulke with no way to feed his army. Arik Bulke surrenders in 1264, not defeated on the battlefield, but starved out in his own capital. But by then, the damage can no longer be undone. The empire's other branches, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Il Khanate in Persia, stop waiting for orders from a distant Great Khan and start governing as independent states. There's also a religious rift beneath the politics. Berk, Khan of the Golden Horde, has converted to Islam. When he learns his cousin Hulagu executed the Caliph of Baghdad and destroyed the capital of the Islamic world, he considers it an unforgivable betrayal, not just against family, but against his faith. In 1262, the unthinkable happens. Barely 40 years after Genghis Khan's death, the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate, two branches of the same family, go to open war with each other over control of the Caucasus. And the fracture doesn't stop there. For the next 3 decades, a prince of the Ogadide branch, Kaidu, wages nearly uninterrupted war against Kublai and his successors for control of Central Asia, a conflict that lasts longer than it took Genghis Khan to build the entire empire. Each of these civil wars consumes resources, troops, and time that would otherwise have been used to keep expanding the empire. The same machine that conquered from Korea to Hungary in 2 generations spends the next 3 fighting itself. The empire Genghis Khan built so that no external power could defeat it ends up fragmented by the one force he never saw coming, his own blood, fighting over the crown. By 1300, what was once a single empire is now 4 khanates that barely speak to each other.
And each one still has a different final blow waiting for it. The Il Khanate of Persia collapses in 1335 when its last ruler dies without a male heir. Once again, the same wound. No one knows who's next. The territory dissolves into rival states in under a decade. But the most brutal blow doesn't come from any rival army. It comes from something the Mongol Empire itself helped build without realizing it. The trade and military routes that connected China to Europe across all of Central Asia. The infrastructure that made the empire possible become, according to the most accepted theory among historians, the highway the Black Death travels on. In 1346, during the Mongol siege of the trading city of Kaffa in Crimea, the Golden Horde's forces catapult plague-infected corpses over the city's walls. Genoese merchants who flee by sea carry the plague to the ports of Europe. In 6 years, the Black Death kills 1/3 of Europe's population and devastates with equal force the populations and economies of the Mongol Khanates themselves, whose power depended on the very trade the plague has just destroyed. There's a bitter irony in all of this. It's believed the very Mongol army besieging Kaffa was also decimated by the plague it was about to launch at the city.
The weapon they used ended up killing a good number of those who used it. The empire that was built by connecting the whole world ends up, in part, destroyed by that very connection. One by one, the pieces keep falling. The Yuan dynasty doesn't fall overnight. 2 decades of peasant rebellions, the largest known as the Red Turban Rebellion, wear down Mongol rule in China until a former Buddhist monk turned rebel, Xu Yuanzhang, ends up founding the Ming dynasty in its place in 1368. The Golden Horde fragments into smaller and smaller khanates through the 15th century, weakened until Russia, the territory it once ruled, is free. The final blow doesn't come until 1480, more than 2 centuries after the Mongols first subjugated the Russian principalities. At the so-called Great Standoff on the Ugra River, Russian forces and what remains of the Golden Horde watch each other for weeks from opposite banks of a river, and the Horde, weakened and divided, withdraws without fighting. Russia stops paying Mongol tribute for good. The Chagatai Khanate splits into 2 halves that don't even recognize each other, and each of those endings, Persia, China, Russia, Central Asia, repeats with variations the same pattern, not an outside conquest, but a question about who rules that no one managed to answer in time.
No outside enemy ever achieved what Genghis Khan's own family did to itself. There was no final battle, no capital sacked to mark the end. History's largest empire didn't die from a single blow. It died from 1,000 small paralyses. Every time someone with power asked, "So who rules now?" and no one had an answer everyone accepted. Today, almost 800 years later, Genghis Khan's name is still Mongolia's most revered national symbol. The only nation of the 4 that were born from his empire that still exists under that name on the map. Genghis Khan spent 40 years figuring out how to conquer the known world. He never spent a single day figuring out how he was going to hand it to the next generation. And that is to this day the question that decides whether an empire or anything else someone builds to last survives the person who started it. This is the first episode of How Empires Die. Next week, the empire that believed itself eternal for 500 years and the decision that made it collapse in under 25.